Hello, everybody. Artist and Finesse with you. It is Wednesday night, and Finesse, a lot to go over in the wake of the season ending for the Penguins. Big press conference from Ray Shero today. Dan Bilesma spoke. Dan Bilesma was extended. A vote of confidence from Marc-Andre Fleury from both men. What's your takeaway today?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everyone's a little confused about what happened in the Boston series, as am I. And it's just, I guess they're having a hard time thinking that anything is that wrong when they can't even find an explanation for what went wrong in the first place. So, you know, it's hard to blame the Penguins for keeping Bilesma. I wouldn't have been against it if they fired him, but I guess he needs to get better. And I think Shero mentioned that in the press conference. Like, it's not just keep Bilesma and have Bilesma keep doing the same thing. He's got to get better as a coach, the same way that the players have to get better.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that the question is, can he get better? Ray Shero made an interesting point. He talked about how he can't be swayed by public opinion, and he gave as an example the Paul Martin situation. Last year, everybody was ready to ride Paul Martin right out of town. Could have easily done that, and it would have been completely justified, but he stuck with Paul Martin. Paul Martin had sort of a renaissance season, but the difference, obviously, between Paul Martin and either Dan Bilesma or Marc-Andre Fleury is that Paul Martin had one truly terrible year. He didn't have four disappointments in a row. And you have to wonder, when Ray Shero talks about how Dan Bilesma is a really intelligent guy and can adapt and can adjust, why hasn't that happened over the last couple of years? I mean, we've seen the same thing in the playoffs the last couple of years, haven't we?
Yeah, and there was the question at the press conference. It was like, what went wrong in Game 2? And Shero babbled for like 12 minutes, and his basic answer was, I have no idea. And it's just hard to have any confidence that these meltdowns aren't going to happen again next year. There's just no reason to be confident unless we see some dramatic shift during the regular season, but even that's probably not going to be enough. So I think it's good to keep this stability. Bilesma's a very likable guy. The players like him. He keeps you as a destination franchise because other players in the league seem to like him. And that's very valuable. But I don't have confidence that the Pens are going to win any series because he's out-coaching other people. I think they're more likely to lose a series because he gets out-coached than win a series because he's out-coaching somebody.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I really do. Although I have to tell you, in terms of trying to figure out what happened against Boston, it's becoming pretty clear to me. If you're watching the game tonight, Boston just went up 2-0 on the Blackhawks. This is a really good team, and they're really hot right now. I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. In no sport is momentum more important than it is in hockey in the playoffs. And that's what we're seeing right now with the Bruins. The Penguins just came face-to-face with a runaway train, basically. And it's not a surprise that they lost the series. What is a surprise is, as we've touched on, they didn't adjust and adapt as quickly as we would have liked to have seen, right?
Well, do you look back now that we're not in the raw emotion phase of the loss, or 6 days later, and do you look back on it any differently or feel less disappointed? Because there were a lot of people saying right after, well, it's not that the Pens lost, it's the way that they lost. But the more I think about it, I kind of think that's BS. Like, I wouldn't be any happier if the Pens had lost in 6 or 7 games instead of 4.
Right.
Maybe I wouldn't be, worried about Bilesma as much, but it's not like it's a more satisfying end to the season if Boston continues to roll through Chicago. Still disappointing.
Very disappointing. And one thing I really agreed with Ray Shiro on is that the Penguins lost the series in Game 2 when the game just completely got away from them. They didn't compete. In every other game, they really competed hard, and an inch or two here or there, they could have won those games, all of those games.
Yeah, but see, I don't think that's a valid thing for him to say. That depends lost the series in Game 2 because that's the second game. There's still, Boston's supposed to win 2 of the last 5 to win the series, and that's something that I think fans can say.
It doesn't mean they wouldn't have. It doesn't mean they wouldn't have lost the series anyway. It just means that the other losses, it was like a coin flip. It really was, and that game was just an absolute abomination. That's what I think he meant, and I agree with that. I mean, what I'll say that was frustrating about the games that we could have won but still lost, I just thought that we were sort of banging our head against the wall by not changing things up at all. I don't think that we got dirty enough in those games. We got great chances based on playing Bilesma's system and by generating them with our skill, but I didn't see people go into the net in Game 3 and 4. There were too many times when there was just nobody in front of the net. Everything was on the perimeter, and with our skill, we can still generate chances that way. But I would like to see, when we talk about Bilesma learning and becoming a better coach, I would like to see him be able to adapt in a game like that where you run into a hot goalie and a really stifling defense. What do? You've got to change things up a little bit and get some traffic in front of the net and just get the puck to the point and get some shots on goal. And I just didn't see that enough.
Yeah, I watched Boston play, and everyone on their team is always so close together. And the Penguins play that system where it's these long stretch passes. And if those don't work, that's where you get in a position where the forwards are way down the ice and the other team's coming back on a 3-on-2. Like if stuff gets bottled up in the neutral zone. There needs to be a little more of that puck support. We talked about it in the last podcast, like with the Kevin Constantine thing. That's
right.
Keep everyone closer together. Don't spread.
You don't need Chicago.
Yeah, I see. You don't need like Matt Niskanen throwing a 110-foot pass that hopefully Chris Kunitz gets a blade on before it's icing. And it's just there's too many bodies for it to go through. Other players are just so big. They're so good with their stick. I mean, people, Crosby gets all the credit for it over anybody else for like knocking pucks out of midair with his stick, but everybody in the league seems to do that now. The only way to not turn the puck over is to make the passes really close. Who scored that? Hossa? Is that Hossa?
Sod. Brandon Sod.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll hear a lot about that being in Pittsburgh.
There's a couple topics that I want to raise with you, and I want to get your thoughts on before we talk about what the Penguins need to do this offseason.
Yeah.
They both relate to the press conference. One is, what did you think of Ray Shiro's invoking the Red Wings as sort of the model organization and talking about how they're a model of consistency with Babcock, and that the Penguins think they have the right guy in Bilesma to be sort of a long-term coach. That's number one. And number two, what did you think about the endorsement of Fleury, and do you think it's genuine?
Well, the Detroit thing, if you're going to be Detroit East, even though I guess Detroit's coming to the Eastern Conference next year, it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's not bad to be competitive every year. But it's weird because I don't know how it happens, but some teams get labeled as, you get credit for being good every year, like Detroit. But then other teams, I guess it's the one Stanley Cup, because other teams like Washington and San Jose have very good regular season success. They're very competitive every year. They're set up to be competitive for a long time, and they're like completely ridiculed for it. Right. So you want to beat Detroit, but you got to get cups. You have to win cups. It's not good enough to just make the playoffs every year with these guys. For Detroit, maybe it is because their guys aren't of the pedigree that our guys are. Even though I'm not saying that our guys are better, but you have Crosby and Malkin. With that comes a certain expectation, and you have to win another cup. You just have to. It's not good enough to get to the finals.
Yeah, there's a real tension there. I like that about what Shiro said, and I like that the Penguins try to be the model organization and to have that consistency year to year. But you're right. I mean, there's a point where you have to say that anything less than fulfilling your potential is not acceptable, and I think everybody feels that the Penguins did not fulfill their potential the last 4 years. And when does that stop being okay?
Yeah. There's something to be said, though. Like, there is a lot of luck involved in winning the Cup. And I don't mean the teams that win the Cup are lucky, but you have to catch a lot of breaks along the way, right? I mean, you could go back to any Penguins series and that the Penguins have won, and they catch breaks along the way. You get good bounces, but you have to put yourself in a position to get those bounces. So that's where it's good to be like Detroit. Because if you're in the playoffs every year, if Crosby makes the playoffs every year of his career and he plays a 16-year career, he'll probably just by numbers win 2 cups because whatever the skill difference is, it will be enough to get that second cup rather than just like 1 out of 16, So
yeah, and you've got to make your break such that you get more than 2 goals in 14 periods.
Right, that's not bad breaks. That's partly bad breaks, but you could get the worst breaks in the world and you still can't score 2 goals in 4 games. But what you said about Fleury,
yeah, that's what
he has nothing else. There's nothing else that Ray Shero can say. Like we all would love for him to come out and be like, "Yeah, I want to get rid of Fleury. I'm going to do everything I can to get him off our cap." But he might be thinking that inside, but he just can't say it because you can't kill all your leverage. So we're going to have to stomach another month of thinking that Fleury's coming back as the Penguins goalie next year. And I don't think I want that. I know you don't.
Right. If your takeaway from this press conference is I can't believe Shiro endorsed Fleury, then I'm just glad you're not the GM. Because if you say anything else besides Marc-Andre Fleury is the number 1 goalie, he won 40 games, so difficult to replace, then you should be fired as the general manager. It's not that hard of a call to do that.
Right. If you don't, then you're Vancouver, who's been openly trying to trade Luongo and having no success doing it because everybody knows everyone's waiting to see if they'll buy him out. They're not going to give up anything when they know the team's desperate to get rid of him. And then they're stuck with this enormous distraction forever. So even if the Pens can't end up getting rid of Fleury, I guess it's just better for everyone if people think that the Pens actually want him on the team.
Correct.
And certainly better for Fleury. If anyone's not emotionally equipped to handle being unwanted, it would be Fleury. So he has, just for his sake, you got to coddle him a little bit.
Yeah, you got to keep your options open with Fleury if you're Shiro, and I think that's probably a good segue into what we think the Pens should do this summer. I have a top 5 list. I'm guessing you have a top 5 list. What's your number 1?
Well, I haven't put it in order of importance, but I'll start with the one that's most pressing. I would say re-sign Malkin, extend Malkin, with one condition. Don't give him more than Crosby. I think you give him the exact same amount, but I think you really get into very dangerous territory if you start giving him more than Crosby. And I don't mean from an ego perspective. I mean on a pure numbers perspective. I just don't think he's worth it. And it's not that Crosby's better than him or anything like that. You have to live in the facts of the moment, which is that the Penguins have Crosby signed. Do they really need another guy signed for over $9 million? And I don't think that they do. So if you get him for Crosby's price, extend him for 8 years. If not, then you really have to consider moving him.
I think that they are going to sign him, and I think he will take a discount. I'm not sure if it'll be what Crosby makes, but he could command conceivably $10 million. Wouldn't you agree on the open market? I mean, I think teams would be crazy to pay anybody $12 million when the cap is going down to $64 million. And I understand that his new contract won't kick in until a year from now. But nobody knows what the cap is going to be. Say the cap goes up to $66 million. Are you really going to spend 20% of your cap on Evgeny Malkin? I think any team would be crazy to do that unless you're just unless you're in a terrible market and you just need some enthusiasm for your team. If you actually want to compete, you can't devote that kind of cap space to one player.
Especially if you already have a player taking up that much cap space. And that's why I think that Malkin may be worth $10 million to other teams. He's just not worth that much to the Penguins. Because you get into a redundant territory. Like, do you really need both Crosby and Malkin to have a power play that goes 23%? No. And
yeah.
Like they have it. There's a lot of duplication there with them, and especially when it comes to the power play, because you don't really need both. You obviously put both of them out there if you have them, but you can have. I mean, I know it makes a second line like a first line and all that stuff, but if you just look at something like the power play, it shows that there's a lot of redundancy to paying two guys $9 million.
Well, I agree with the power play point. Even though the Penguins' power play was phenomenal for the first part of the playoffs, it disappeared in the second. But I think the reason that you pay guys like Malkin and Crosby a huge amount of money is so in a series like the one against the Bruins, you have the two best players on the ice in the series. And I think that there's a great argument that against the Bruins, Malkin was one of the top two players, if not the best player in the series, but it just didn't translate to production. So, if you pay two guys a lot of money like that, you better be damn sure that you have the pieces around them to make yourself a real team and not be too reliant on those guys because the puck doesn't always go in for them.
Right, and that's why you need more from a guy like Brandon Sutter. All right, let's move on. What's one of yours?
One of mine is don't overpay for any unrestricted free agents. I want them to sign Pascal Dupuis. I think everybody does. And the thinking is that they can get him somewhere in the range of $3.5 or $4 million a year, which is probably a discount for him compared to what he could get on the open market. I'm okay with paying Pascal Dupuis $3.5. I'm not sure about term. Guy's 34 years old, although he's in phenomenal shape. But, we've got Matt Cook as an unrestricted free agent. We've got Craig Adams. We've got a lot of guys that were 09ers, as Brett Kiesel would say.
Yeah.
But you just can't overpay any of these guys. You can't give them too much term. They're all getting a little bit older. And I don't think this is something that Ray Shero needs to really be counseled about. I think he knows. But these are not easy decisions because these guys are really critical pieces of our team for a really long time. But it wouldn't surprise me if only Pascal Dupuis comes back out of the UFAs.
Yeah, one of the things I would have said was re-sign Dupuis, and I think re-sign Craig Adams if you can because he's generally very strong in the penalty kill, and he's so cheap. Like, maybe you want to get a little bit younger in that position and possibly a little more offense, but he's not going to cost you a lot. So Dupuis and Adams I would re-sign. I wouldn't give Dupuis more than 4, and I'd be hesitant to do 3 years, $12 million. I think 3 years, $10 million would be perfect. I just don't know that you would get that.
And I didn't mean to suggest that the other UFAs shouldn't be re-signed, just not at too high of a price. I would definitely re-sign Craig Adams if he could be had for his standard, $600,000 a year. But beyond that, and if it's a lengthy term, I think you have to tread carefully.
So that I'll respond with another one of mine, which is I would say other than Dupuis and Adams, I would let everyone else go. Iginla and Morrow. And I'm talking about forwards only now. We'll get to the defense. But Iginla and Morrow, they can go. There's no reason to re-sign them. And honestly, they are going to be reminders of whatever went wrong in the Boston series. Like a reminder of the disappointment that was this season. So get them out. Matt Cook, I would say I just don't think he's a good player, but I just don't think he brings something that we can't get from somebody else for lower price and less of a distraction. You know, like he was good in the playoffs. I get all that, but sometimes you just have you just have to get a new player. Like it's just good to have a different guy who plays a different style, you know, different energy.
I think Matt Cook is actually quite underrated. I thought in some games he was maybe our best forward, but I agree with you. By all accounts, he's going to be looking for a 3-year term, which we'd be crazy to do. He's another guy that's, you know, inching into his mid-30s. It's time for a new blood. I think we agree. I want to give you my next point.
Well, wait. What do you think about Kennedy? He's got to go, right?
I think he's got to go.
He just doesn't have a role on this team that's gonna do anything for him.
If the guy can't stay in the lineup, there's no way you pay a guy $2 million a year.
And it's just it's a little stale. I don't get the sense that he's like a beloved figure on the team. You never hear anyone talk about him, any of the players. The fans don't care for him. He doesn't do anything really that great. So he's an obvious let go situation.
I think we agree. The only guy that I really, really want to keep is Dupuis, and I would be on board with Adams. So good enough. My next point is also another personnel point, and I think it's pretty obvious and a good thing to do to shake things up. And we talked about that actually in season, and that's trading Matt Niskanen. He's essentially our fourth defenseman in terms of minutes played. I think he's soft. I think that Simone Dupre and Bilesma said this over the last couple of days is going to assume a top 4 role next year. It's a logical move to trade Niskanen, and specifically, I think he should be traded for a big forward. I don't even necessarily care who that forward is, but I think we need to get bigger and younger on the wing. And I think mobile defensemen like Niskanen can fetch a guy like that, who's maybe a little unpolished, but can slot into a third-line role, which we need if we're going to let Ginla and Morrow go.
Yeah, that's one of the things I have too. Trade Niskanen. I thought he was a good candidate to be traded at the deadline. He's a little soft. He's an okay player, but he's just always okay. And
right.
you can get okay from somebody else, or you just don't need. You just use him to get something better. Like I don't know that Niskanen is anything more than like a Jordan Leopold at best. He's just not worth keeping around. Like just get rid of him. He's just taking up space for guys who could end up being better, like Dupre, or just give Bortuzzo his minutes or Englund his minutes. It's really not going to be worse. It's not like Niskanen does anything that well.
Or one of the more promising guys that are in the system, like Mata or Harrington, somebody that we haven't seen yet that might be rough around the edges, but could benefit from some third pairing minutes this season. I think there are much higher upside guys in our system than Bortuzzo and Englund right now.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. I think one of the problems that the Pens had this year is they didn't play around with any of the young guys enough when it was obvious that the Pens were going to make the playoffs. And
right.
Not to be cocky or anything, but the Penguins are going to make the playoffs next year unless something terrible happens. Assuming Crosby and Malkin are healthy, the Penguins are not going to miss the playoffs. So use the time to develop some players. Develop them during the regular season so that when they come into the playoffs, they're not shell-shocked, that they
right.
know what's going on. I mean, you can get a lot better from day 1 in October to May in the playoffs. You can improve a lot, but not if you don't play. Not if you're playing in Wilkes-Barre.
So, right.
But
so what do you have next?
Having said get rid of Niskanen, I would not be against re-signing Douglas Murray, Crankshaft.
That's one of my points.
Because the difference between him and Niskanen is that while Murray has his liabilities, he also does some things very well. Niskanen does everything very mediocre. Murray is at least a big body who is good on the penalty kill and in certain matchups is fine. And I thought he was pretty good against Boston. And assuming the Penguins pick up some sort of, or make some sort of style adjustment, I don't know that he becomes like a detriment to that if it's a little bit more of a defensive style that we start to play.
Yeah, you and I are on the same page there. I think Crankshaft brought a lot to the table for this team, particularly against Boston. I thought he was phenomenal. He plays limited minutes as he should. He's not a very good skater, but when he's out there, he demonstrates a hockey sense and a real toughness that we just don't otherwise have on defense. Even Orpik doesn't play the physical style that Crankshaft plays, and I think that's a really important element, particularly in the playoffs.
Right, and you look back at a couple of the things that the Penguins did, or that Ray Shero did the past few years that maybe he would do differently again. I don't know for sure, but that was letting Scuderi go, letting Hal Gill go. And
right,
if you have the guy already, then why not just have him from the beginning of the season? And I'm not, like, I don't want to boost up Murray like he's some great player, but there's no question that if the Penguins let Murray go, then come next trade deadline, what's the Penguins' biggest need again? A big defenseman, right? Like Douglas Murray. That's what everyone's going to say the Penguins need to get. So if you can get him now at the beginning of the season, he's comfortable here. He knows about the team. He knows about the guys already, and he'll have 82 games to add to his resume. I don't know. I think it'd be good to give him to re-sign him.
I want to segue to my next point. I think it's a natural progression. I think the Penguins need to try, not definitely do it, but they need to try to sign Letang to an extension. And I've gone back and forth on this a lot, and you may disagree. But if you look at Stanley Cup winners for the last half decade, even, going back 10 years, I think you'd be hard-pressed to pick one Stanley Cup winner that did not have an elite defenseman. And while I'm a big Paul Martin fan, as you know, I think he is a step below elite. And I don't see how you replace a Chris Letang.
That was hard for you to say, wasn't it, that Paul Martin's a step below elite?
It was hard, and it was also hard for me to say I don't think you can replace Chris Letang because I just have enormous frustration with him. But
so what's your price? At what price?
I would go $7 million a year for 7 years. 7 years, $49 million. Because if it's not Letang, you need a premier defenseman to be a champion in this league. And that's what those defensemen go for. So you can't have any illusions about that. Your lineup might suffer in other departments, but we've got people coming up through the ranks on defense. So if you need to have a top-heavy defense salary-wise, I think the Penguins are well positioned to do that. Right. And I think you need to make that effort to sign Letang. He may turn down an offer like that, in which case you have to go to a plan B, which is trading Letang for prime time, ready assets.
The Jordan Stahl thing, but you have to get a little more to help the NHL squad right away than we got in the Stahl trade.
Absolutely. But I think that's the clear path as far as Letang goes. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, because I get madder about Letang than anyone on the Penguins, and there are times when I yell at the TV like, I hate you. I literally hate you, Chris Letang. Because he's maddening, but he also has a ceiling that's higher than maybe any defenseman in the league. He puts up a ton of points. Like, he's good at moving the puck up the ice. Like, he gets the puck up to Crosby and Malkin. That's a huge skill. And, yeah, we have a lot of guys coming up in the system, but the chances of any of those guys turning out to be as good as Letang are very slim. And if they do, and you already have Letang signed, well, then trade those guys.
Right.
But use them to get other pieces. Like, you don't need two Chris Letangs. So if you already have one who you know is going to be good, then I definitely, I'm on board. I think $7 million is right. I don't know whether he'd take it. He might not. I mean, he if he can get 8 somewhere else. What did Suter get? I'm going to look that up. Not that he's Ryan Suter, but
I think he got a ridiculous amount of money. I think he got $100 million over however many years. I mean, that's really the number that matters. If you're getting $100 million, it doesn't really matter over how many years, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
What do you have? 13 years, $98 million, $7.5 million cap hit. So, yeah, I think the Penguins can look at it and say, Letang, they go to his agent and say, Ryan Suter is one of the best defensemen in the league, if not the best. He's got a $7.5 million cap hit. Yeah, it's a $100 million contract, but you know what? He got it in before the CBA. You didn't. That's tough shit. You get $7 million. I think that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, that's a legitimate offer, and he can take it, he can leave it, but we're limited, we're restricted. We're going to have 2 guys. If you throw in Neal and Fleury, we're going to have 4 guys making $28 million for 4 guys, and then we've got to get Letang on top of that. I mean,
that's why you got to get rid of Fleury's contract. You just do. Like 5.
Well, is that your next point?
No, that's not it. But I just think you have to get rid of him because he makes $5 million. If he made $2 million, it was his head case like he is. I'd say fine, deal with it. But I just think $5 million is too much for him. I really do. And why would Voku not be good enough in the playoffs next year for us?
Well, it would worry me just because of his age and his injury history. I wouldn't feel completely comfortable having Vokoun with no safety net.
So I would maybe Niskanen is a piece like in a deal along with Fleury that could net you a goalie back.
Yeah, maybe.
Decent. Like the Flyers. Who did the Flyers trade for Steve Mason? What was that trade?
I don't even remember. But, we're talking about goalies who are not very good right now. And that just makes the Letang point all the more important. Because you really can't go into a Stanley Cup playoffs without an elite defenseman or an totally screwed.
Who did...
So what else you got?
Hold on. What was the... backup Michael Williams. They need to do a better job of saying what the trade was. Anyway, okay. So the last thing I wanted to say, and I guess if we're re-signing Letang, it's a little trickier. But what would you do with Brooks Orpik? Because he is an unrestricted free agent after this season. There's no doubt in my mind that he's going to want to stay with the Penguins and that the Penguins are going to want to keep him. So is there a price tag that you would put on Orpik? Like everyone's talking about the Letang-Malkin extensions, but I could certainly see an under-the-radar 3 years contract for Brooks Orpik extension. And I wouldn't necessarily be against it.
I don't see the hurry. I mean, I'd like to see what happens next year. I agree. I mean, I think it would be great to have Brooks Orpik in the fold, even if in the next couple of years he transitions to sort of a lower minute eating defenseman, third pairing defenseman,
penalty kill guy.
I'd just like to assess that as we go. I don't think there's any reason to commit to him at this point.
But is there like a number? Is there a number though that like if he was, it's a gamble for him to play another season too. His price could go down, so maybe there's a discounted number you get him for. If you sign him, if you extend him now, give him that certainty, so he doesn't. He might not want to go through a season knowing he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. So maybe trade off the certainty.
He may not want to, but that's life. I'm not too worried about what he's gonna find acceptable. I feel like, he's a big boy. I think the Penguins are going to want him around, but it might have to be on our terms. It might have to be at 1.5 a year for 3 years or something like that after his contract expires. I don't see any reason to do that now, particularly with the uncertain salary cap landscape. I think you just have to wait to see how this unfolds.
So, do you have any other points?
My only other points were, I'll just give them to you at the same time. One was to keep all options open with Fleury. That doesn't mean we necessarily trade him or buy him out, but that Shiro's eyes are open and he understands, as I'm confident he does. I mean, the man is not blind. That if there is a right opportunity to move him, you have to explore that, because there's just no confidence. There can't be confidence. I don't care what they're saying. If they said anything else, then they would be doing a poor job in their role as coach and general manager. They have to throw their support behind the guy. But you have to have your eyes open and be exploring ways to improve the team. And one way to improve it is by giving it confidence in its goaltending, which isn't there right now, Vokun aside, because Vokun is a 37-year-old goalie. So I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket. That's number one. And number two is Bilesma's system, and by extension, the system of the entire organization, down to Wilkes-Barre, needs to be tweaked. There needs to be, coming into the season, an understanding of how to combat the way that other teams combat us, which we haven't seen enough of. When teams in the playoffs figure out how to stop Bilesma's system, they really figure out how to stop it. And there needs to be a counter to that. And if Bilesma's such a smart coach, let's see that implemented going in. Let's not see him stick to his system and not have answers when somebody shuts it down. Those are my final 2 points.
Do you think that ownership would really swallow the money to buy out Fleury? It would cost, it depends what another team signs him to, because I imagine that number would offset what the Penguins have to pay him. It's not like Fleury's going to end up with a windfall by getting bought out. But let's say, he's owed $10 million, but it's actually over $11 million in actual salary,
right,
because of the way his contract was structured. So you got $11 million in salary. What would another, you buy him out, another team pays him what, $2 million a year? That means the Pens got to write a $7 million check to a dude not on the team. That's a lot of money to ask from ownership.
I think the number I heard was $7.7 million, and it's a ton of money, and I'm not convinced that that'll be necessary. I think that there's going to be some kind of market for the guy. He's 28 years old. He's had great regular seasons consistently, and if you think that a change of scenery is what he needs, or maybe a sports psychologist, I don't know.
That's what I thought that Shiro was getting to. At that, he was like, "We need to make change. We haven't been working on things over the summer. I don't want to talk about it." That seemed to me like he was going to see some sports shrink or something, or had like some emotional situation.
Who knows? But
maybe
one thing I do know
firing
is
the goalie coach, maybe that's good. Or not firing, but having a new goalie coach, that could be good for Fleury.
Maybe a new voice in his ear would make a difference.
Instead of his own voice. It's his own head in his own head. He's talking to himself. So.
But you just can't. You can't go into a postseason unless you're sure about the guy. If you don't have competent goaltending, you have absolutely no shot. And he just has had a tendency over the last couple of years to give up goals at the most inopportune times and in a way that just put the dagger in the heart of his team. And you just can't go forward like that.
Right. And the Pledge of Allegiance to Fleury from Shiro today means nothing to me. I really think that he said the same thing about Stahl, although he did then offer Stahl a contract.
Right.
But, that's all he could say. That's all, there's nothing else you could do. He's on your team. You got to pretend like he's good. If you start ripping your own players, how do you expect to get rid of him?
That's right. So all this is going to happen very quickly. I mean, we're talking, what are we now? We're already at June 12th. We're used to the season being over by now and having a few weeks to, sort of let the off-season maneuvering unfold. But it's going to happen so quickly after this Cup Finals is over. I think free agency starts July 4th.
I know, it's exciting. I'm looking
July
forward
6th,
to it. I'm very excited about it. I wouldn't be against the Pens being relatively calm on free agent day, other than trying to get Dupuis signed. I don't think we need to make a big splash. I look back at 08-09. On paper, there's no question that the Penguins were a worse team going into the 2008-2009 season than they were when they lost in the Cup Finals to Detroit. The team that lost in the Cup Finals to Detroit was loaded. Absolutely loaded. Because you had Hossa and Malone. And basically all that happened the next season was those two guys were gone. And there was nobody who thought the Penguins would be a better team because of it. And I guess they ended up playing terribly and firing the coach. But, there's not... If the Pens come in without Iginla, Morrow, and Kennedy, and Cook, and Niskanen or whatever for next season, it doesn't mean they're going to be worse. They just have to play better and, try to actually score in a playoff game.
I agree. So you have any final thoughts?
No. It's still a disappointing end to the season. It, you gotta hope next year comes quickly because you got to try to get this taste out of your mouth. But we said the same thing about the Flyers series, but it was in the back of our minds as early as the beginning of as the game 2 of the Islanders series. You started having flashbacks of that. So, Pens go into the first round of the playoffs next year and start getting stymied by a hot goalie. Look out, because you're going to start having nightmares.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be back with another podcast, I think, in the next couple of weeks as the amnesty period and free agency heats up. Until next time, GTOG.